The lights inside the SoFi Stadium's VIP lounge were harsh and unforgiving. The lights bounced off the shiny shoes and sparkling jewelry of the rich people who were there. Champagne was flowing everywhere, and velvet ropes separated the important people from the others. It was clear that some people were treated differently. They were treated as if they were better, more important, and more special than anyone else. That night, nobody paid attention to the man in the gray hoodie who walked into the lounge. Or rather, they noticed him, but not in a good way. He walked in alone, not accompanied by anyone, and he didn't have a name tag hanging from his neck like other important people did. His boots were clean, but a little scuffed, and his jeans were worn out but still in one piece. He didn't have a drink or a phone in his hand. He didn't even seem to care about anything. He just walked quietly to a corner booth, where he sat down without saying a word. The booth he chose had a view of the football field, and there was a huge flat screen showing old Super Bowl highlights. He sat down and rested his elbows on his knees, and the brim of his black cap shaded his face. From a distance, he could have easily been mistaken for a tired delivery guy taking a break. People walked by, some glanced at him, others frowned, but no one seemed to care. A man, a young tech bro, brushed against him as he walked by, but the man in the hoodie didn't react at all. He just sat there, calm, not bothered, and not even looking up. At the far end of the room, near the oyster bar, a young man named Maxwell Thornfield noticed him. Maxwell was the son of a senator, and he owned several businesses. He loved showing off his wealth and making everyone laugh. Maxwell squinted his eyes at the man in the hoodie. "Hey, check this out," Maxwell said to his friends. "Looks like we've got a stowaway in here." His friends chuckled softly at first. Maxwell stood up and stretched, loudly and ostentatiously. "Well, let's go say hi to the help," he said with a grin. The people around him laughed, and no one said anything to stop him. Maxwell walked confidently toward the man in the hoodie. Keanu didn't look up or even acknowledge Maxwell's presence. He was still focused on the football game. As Maxwell got closer, he knocked over a tray of snacks that was sitting on a ledge. The tray tipped and the snacks went flying everywhere. Crackers, nuts, and toothpicks scattered across the floor like confetti. Maxwell turned around, acting surprised. "Whoops," he said, as if it wasn't his fault. "What a mess." He then turned to Keanu, still sitting calmly at his table, and said loudly, "Hey, buddy, since you're just sitting there doing nothing, mind helping us clean this up? Unless it's not in your job description." People around them started to pull out their phones, recording the moment. Some of them smiled at the joke, while others just watched, unsure of what was going on. But Keanu, still calm and collected, stood up slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't look mad. He just stood up and walked over to the pile of scattered snacks. He bent down and started picking up the crackers one by one. The room went quiet. It was as if everyone was holding their breath. Maxwell, who had been laughing, looked confused. He didn't expect the man to actually do it. He thought Keanu would stand up and say something back, maybe even fight back. But Keanu just quietly picked up the mess without saying a word. He moved slowly and carefully, picking up each piece of the mess and placing them into a napkin. The group around Maxwell started to grow quiet. The joke had gone too far. Some people whispered, unsure of what to say. A teenage boy in the corner who had been filming lowered his phone and said, "Wait, he looks," but before he could finish his thought, he shook his head. It was too late. The damage had already been done. Keanu stood up, nodded slightly as if to himself, and then walked back to his seat. He didn't say a word to anyone. But the mood in the room had changed. People were no longer laughing. They were no longer sure of what they had just seen. Maxwell, now feeling proud of himself, went back to his group of friends. His girlfriend, Maya, leaned in toward him, sipping her cocktail. "You're awful," she said, smiling at him, but still slightly annoyed. Maxwell grinned and puffed out his chest, feeling like he had one. And yet, wildly entertaining, he replied, looking back at the man in the hoodie. Still there? Maya asked, nodding toward Keanu's booth. Maxwell looked over and saw that Keanu was still sitting there, completely silent and unmoving. Maxwell's friend Bennett, who liked to cause trouble, leaned in with a mischievous grin on his face. Let's give the TikTok kids a real show, he said. Maya smirked and asked, What do you have in mind? Bennett pulled out a sticky note from his pocket and quickly wrote something on it with a Sharpie. He shielded it with his hand so no one could see. Check this out, he said, laughing quietly to himself. He showed it to Maxwell and Maya before walking away to put the note on the back of Keanu's hoodie. Bennett slipped behind Keanu's booth and pressed the sticky note onto the back of his hoodie. Keanu didn't notice. He didn't react. Bennett stepped back, hands raised innocently, while the group of friends nearby laughed quietly, watching the whole thing unfold. A young influencer, standing nearby, pulled out her phone and took a picture of Keanu sitting there with the note on his back. The photo quickly spread online, with the caption, "Security, come get your boy." No one recognized the man sitting in the corner. They didn't know he was Keanu Reeves, the actor who had starred in blockbuster movies and done many good things for the world. To them, he was just a man they could make fun of. But Keanu didn't care. He didn't reach behind and rip off the note. He didn't try to fight back. He just sat there, letting them laugh. He was there to remember, not to prove anything to anyone. The laughter started to die down, not because anyone felt bad, but because the joke was no longer funny. The people who had made fun of him started to realize that they had gone too far. But it was too late. They would never forget the man in the hoodie, who had quietly stood up for himself in the most powerful way possible. They had made fun of the man in the hoodie. They laughed and made jokes, and some videos of him had already been shared all over the internet. But Keanu just sat there quietly, not upset, not broken. He didn't care what anyone said or did. This made Maxwell feel uncomfortable. He stared at Keanu, who still didn't react. The paper sign was still stuck to his back, and Keanu hadn't even noticed it, or maybe he had noticed and didn't care. Maxwell didn't like it. "What's his deal?" he muttered while swirling the wine in his fancy glass. Maya leaned on him and said, "I don't know, maybe he's one of those street artists who pretend to be statues." Bennett laughed and said, "If he is, he's bad at making money." Maxwell stood up and straightened his jacket. "Nah," he said. "I think he's just a stubborn little cockroach who doesn't know when he's not welcome." He grabbed a new glass of wine from the server's tray and walked toward Keanu like he owned the place. Keanu didn't look up. Maxwell stood by his table for a moment, thinking about saying something nice, but instead, he smiled and said loudly so everyone could hear, "Here, let me help you dress the part." With a quick flick of his wrist, he tossed the wine onto Keanu's chest. The red wine splashed across Keanu's gray hoodie, spreading out like a big stain. The glass didn't break because Maxwell made sure it didn't. Everyone gasped. Phones went up, and people started filming. Keanu blinked, but he didn't get upset. Slowly and calmly, he took a napkin from the table and wiped the stain, not in a rush or with anger. He didn't even look at Maxwell yet. Maxwell smiled smugly and said, "What? If he wants to be part of the show, he might as well look the part." But this time, no one laughed. The room felt different. Maya nervously laughed, but even she was looking around, not knowing what to do. Someone at the back whispered, "Okay, that was too much." But Maxwell didn't care. He thought the silence meant everyone was giving in to him. He leaned closer to Keanu and said, "You should leave. You don't belong here." Finally, Keanu looked up. His eyes were calm, and he wasn't scared. "I know," he said quietly, and then he stood up. The wine stain was still on his hoodie, and the sign was still fluttering on his back. He didn't say anything else. He didn't run away. He just walked towards the door. But just as he was about to leave, the door opened from the other side. The VIP lounge doors opened quietly, but everyone turned to look. Keanu stopped. A tall figure walked into the room. He had a black coat on, and his face was calm and serious. He walked with so much confidence, like he already knew what was going to happen. It was James Cooper. No one made a big deal of his arrival, no loud announcement or security guards. But everyone knew who he was. Phones came out again, but this time they were filming out of respect, not to laugh. James looked around the room, his eyes sharp, and then he saw Keanu. First, he noticed the wine stain and the sign still on his back. He frowned. Maxwell spoke first. "James. Hey man, we weren't expecting you so early." James didn't answer. He walked past the fancy snacks, the leather chairs, and all the rich people. He stopped in front of Keanu. Calmly, he reached out and took the paper sign off Keanu's back. He read it, then crumpled it up in his hand. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice low but serious. No one said anything. Maxwell didn't speak. James looked around the room, scanning the people. "You all laughed," he said. "So, someone here knows who did it." The room was quiet. Keanu stood still beside him, the stain still on his chest, but now everything felt different. James looked down at the crumpled paper, then back up at the room. "You know what I hate more than a coward?" James said, his eyes narrowing. "An audience that cheers one." Maxwell tried to laugh it off. "It's just a joke, man." But James turned to him, sharply. Maxwell's mouth hung open. "What?" James pointed at Keanu, the stain, the crumbs still on the floor, and said, "Do you know who this is?" Maxwell didn't answer right away. Some weird fan? Maybe he's trying to look like John Wick." James gave a short, bitter laugh. "He's not trying to be anyone," he said. "This is Keanu Reeves." Everyone in the room froze. The whole lounge went silent. James turned to the crowd. "You spilled wine on a man who has donated more money to cancer research than anyone in this room. You made fun of a guy who gave up his mansion to live closer to his sister when she was sick. You laughed at someone who is more real than most of the people in this room." People gasped. One person even dropped their phone. Keanu looked down at the floor, but didn't say anything. James turned to Keanu, his voice softer now. "Sorry I'm late." Keanu gave a small smile. "You're right on time." James faced the crowd again, his voice colder now. "You mocked a man you didn't know. You filmed it. You posted it. You laughed." Maxwell stood up straighter, trying to act tough. "Okay, so he's Keanu Reeves. Cool. But that doesn't mean he gets to dress like that." James's voice got sharper. "Like what?" he asked. "Like someone who's not here to impress you?" Everyone in the room was silent now. No one was laughing anymore. James stepped closer to Maxwell. "You thought he didn't belong here because he didn't look like you. He didn't play your game. But I invited him here, Maxwell. He's the only person I asked to sit next to me tonight." The room gasped again. People exchanged looks. Keanu shifted slightly, but didn't speak. Maxwell still didn't get it. "Look, I didn't." James cut him off. "He didn't walk in here like he owned the place. That's the point. He walked in like a man who didn't need to own anything to matter." Maxwell felt smaller now. James looked around the room again. "Every one of you who filmed, laughed, or stood by and did nothing. You're just as guilty." Maya quietly put her phone away. Bennett looked down at the floor. Even the bartender looked ashamed. James looked at the crumpled paper in his hand. You taped a sign to his back like he was a joke. You spilled wine on him like he was nothing. And not one of you asked why he was here. Not one of you even thought you might be wrong. No one spoke. Maxwell opened his mouth, but no words came out. James turned back to Keanu. I'm sorry, he said softly. Keanu met his gaze. Not your fault. James wasn't done yet. He turned back to Maxwell one last time. You've embarrassed yourself, he said, his voice hard. And you've embarrassed this whole place. He nodded to security, who was already moving toward Maxwell. So unless you plan on cleaning that floor yourself, I suggest you leave. Maxwell froze. He looked around at Maya and his friends, but none of them moved. They didn't even look at him. For the first time, Maxwell felt small. He turned and walked out, not saying another word. The doors closed behind him with a soft click, and the room was still. James took a deep breath, then turned back to Keanu. The wine stain was still there, but Keanu was calm. Let's get you a new seat, James said. Keanu smiled a little. Anywhere's fine, he said softly. I just came to watch the game. The room was quiet. Maxwell was gone, the wine had dried, and the shame still hung in the air like smoke. James and Keanu stood side by side, facing a room that had just humiliated a man they never really saw. James took a breath and said, I wasn't going to say anything tonight. This was supposed to be a quiet thank you, but I think some of you need to hear why he's here. He looked at Keanu and then back at the room. 5 years ago, during my last season with the Patriots, James started, my dad got really sick. He had liver cancer. It happened so fast, and there was no miracle. It was ugly. I spent every day off at the hospital with him, watching someone I looked up to, my dad, slowly disappear. No one moved. The room had forgotten about the drinks and the talking. They were all listening carefully. James continued, There was one night I will never forget. It was a really bad night. I was sitting alone in the waiting room, with cold coffee and bad lights. I looked up, and there was this guy sitting across from me. He was quiet, wearing a hoodie and jeans. I almost didn't recognize him. James smiled a little. It was Keanu Reeves. He was sitting there with his sister. She was fighting leukemia. Some people gasped quietly. One girl in the back of the room put her phone down. James went on. Keanu didn't say much. He just nodded at me. But then he got up, went to the vending machine, and came back with 2 cups of tea. One for me, one for him. We didn't talk about movies or football. We just sat there, 2 guys who were both hurting, trying to stay strong for the people we loved. James looked down for a moment, then raised his eyes again. I never forgot that. He spent months living in a simple apartment, just a few blocks away from the hospital. No press, no attention. He walked his sister to her chemotherapy, holding her hand with one hand and carrying her bag with the other. When she was too weak to climb the stairs, he even paid to put in a new elevator. He did all this quietly, without anyone knowing. He didn't want any praise or attention. Some people in the room lowered their heads, feeling bad. James added, I invited him here today because my dad told me before he passed away that Keanu was the real deal. James paused for a moment. But some of you poured wine on him. You made him pick up food from the floor. The room was silent for a long time. Keanu, still standing there in his hoodie with stains on it, spoke softly. I'm not here for apologies, he said. I'm just here for the game. James nodded, his eyes a little wet. Then let's watch it together. He motioned to the front row, the best seats in the lounge, the seats reserved for legends. Keanu followed James through the crowd. This time, people didn't ignore him. They looked away because they couldn't bear to face him anymore. Down on the field, the crowd cheered. In the VIP lounge, everything was quieter now. Not silent, but softer. The gossip, the laughing, the talking, it was all gone. It felt different now. Keanu sat next to James in one of the big leather chairs in the front row. He wasn't sitting on a throne or behind ropes, just sitting like everyone else, still wearing his hoodie with the stains, like a badge of honor. James handed him a fresh cup of tea. Keanu nodded and took it. Behind them, people in the room felt uncomfortable. Some tried to talk again, but it didn't feel the same. A few people left quietly, not able to face the truth. Maya and Bennett stayed, their eyes on the field, but they weren't really watching. Part of them was frozen, stuck between feeling ashamed and realizing something important. Then, the Jumbotron camera scanned the lounge. The operator didn't realize who he was filming and zoomed in on Keanu and James. On the screen it said, "James Cooper and guest, legends in the house." There was a pause, then the camera zoomed in closer. The screen sharpened up, and everyone in the stadium gasped. It was like a wave of electricity passed through the crowd. The stadium screen changed the caption. It now said, "Keanu Reeves, actor, philanthropist, legend." No music, no flashing lights, just white text on a black screen. People in the lounge slowly stood up, not because they were told to, but because they couldn't help it. They didn't clap or cheer. They just stood quietly, one by one. The people who had laughed at him, filmed him, or poured wine on him now stood in silence. They weren't standing to worship him, but to show they were wrong. James looked over at Keanu. "You good?" Keanu looked at the field, then at the people staring at him. He nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm good." The crowd roared when the first touchdown was scored. Fireworks went off in the sky. Fans screamed and waved flags, celebrating. But in the VIP lounge, it was different. Keanu sat there, calm and quiet, in the place he deserved to be. Not because anyone gave it to him, but because he had never needed their approval. He just waited for the truth to be seen. They hadn't seen him coming, not because he wasn't important, but because they weren't looking with the right eyes. Keanu Reeves didn't come to that lounge to prove anything. He didn't try to dress a certain way or get attention. He just came quietly and humbly, and in doing so, he showed everyone around him what kind of people they really were. Some people laughed at him, some mocked him, and one man poured wine on him. But Keanu didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He just let them show who they were. And when James Cooper arrived, everything changed. The people who once didn't see Keanu now realized the truth. Keanu was a legend all along. He was always a legend. They just couldn't see it. In a world where everyone cares about how things look on the outside, Keanu reminded us that true greatness is about kindness, character, and doing good quietly. He never needed the spotlight. He just waited for the truth to shine. If you liked this story, tell me in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more fun adventures and mysteries. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.